The wildfire was never supposed to reach the base. At dawn, it had been nothing more than a thin gray line on the horizon, barely visible beyond the desert hills surrounding the United States Air Force training compound. By midday, the wind shifted. By afternoon, the sky darkened as if night had fallen early. Now, as evening approached, flames towered hundreds of feet high, racing toward the perimeter faster than any ground unit could outrun. Inside the mobile command vehicle, the Air Force commander stared at the live feeds in silence. Thermal maps glowed red and white, showing heat surges moving unpredictably across the terrain. One screen showed the Eastern Fuel Depot flashing warnings. Another showed the K-9 kennels, already surrounded by smoke. Wind speed just doubled, an officer said, voice tight. Fires jumping containment lines. The commander didn't respond immediately. He had commanded men and women in combat zones, missile alerts, and emergency landings, but wildfire was a different enemy. It didn't negotiate, it didn't retreat, it only consumed. Outside, sirens wailed across the base. Airmen ran in tight formations toward evacuation points, boots pounding against scorched concrete. Helicopter rotors chopped the air as crews loaded equipment they could still save. Everything else would be left behind. At the K-9 staging area, handlers moved fast but carefully. These dogs were not pets. They were trained military assets, explosive detection, search and rescue, perimeter defense. Each handler had trained with their dog for years, trusting them with their lives in hostile territory. Now smoke burned their eyes as flames crept closer with every passing second. "Unclip them," a sergeant ordered, his voice cracked. The handlers froze. Protocol was clear. Dogs could not be flown out if time was limited and aircraft space prioritized wounded personnel. The thought of releasing them, of leaving them, felt impossible. But the fire didn't care about feelings. One by one, leashes were removed. The dogs didn't run. They stood still, muscles tense, ears locked forward. Their noses lifted into the smoke, drawing in information no human could sense. Something was wrong, they knew it. Back at command, the Eastern Fuel Depot alarm screamed. "Commander," an officer said urgently, "we're out of time." The commander closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, his voice was steady, carrying the weight of command and consequence. "All units, this is command. Immediate evacuation. Repeat, immediate evacuation. Pull out now." The words echoed across radios, across the base, across every heart still inside the perimeter. Engines roared, troops moved. The final helicopters lifted off the ground, dust and ash swirling beneath them. The evacuation line advanced toward safety. Then it happened. 17 dogs broke formation at once. Not one, not two. All 17. They surged forward as if pulled by an invisible force, sprinting past stunned handlers, claws scraping against concrete, bodies low and focused. They didn't scatter. They didn't panic. They ran straight toward the thickest wall of smoke, back into the burning heart of the base. "Stop them," someone shouted. Handlers yelled commands they had drilled thousands of times. The dogs didn't even glance back. Thermal cameras snapped to life, tracking their movement. On screen, white-hot shapes moved fast, splitting into coordinated paths as if executing an unseen plan. The command vehicle fell silent. The commander stepped closer to the screens, his breath shallow. Years of training told him this was chaos. Experience told him it was. "They're not fleeing," he said quietly. An officer swallowed. "Sir, they're searching." The realization hit like a blow. Somewhere inside the fire, someone was still there. And 17 military dogs had decided, without orders, without hesitation, that evacuation was not an option. As flames swallowed the last visible structures and smoke erased the horizon, the commander understood one terrifying truth. The most dangerous part of the operation had just begun. The first thing the commander noticed was the pattern. On the thermal screen, the 17 heat signatures didn't scatter like panicked animals. They moved with purpose, splitting into smaller elements, covering ground efficiently despite the chaos. Smoke clouds interfered with visuals, but every time the feed stabilized, the same thing was clear. The dogs were searching. "Zoom Sector Charlie," the commander ordered. The image sharpened. Flames crawled up the sides of a maintenance hangar, its roof already sagging from the heat. Just beyond it, a white-hot shape paused, circled once, then barked, sharp and insistent. Another dog joined it seconds later. "They've located something," an intelligence officer whispered. At the evacuation line, handlers stood frozen, radios clutched in their hands. These men and women had trained their dogs to obey commands under gunfire and explosions. Never, not once, had they seen them ignore a direct recall. Sergeant Miles clenched his fists as he watched the screen. His dog, Rex, was one of the signatures deep inside the smoke. "He's never broken command," Miles said quietly, "not even in combat." The commander didn't look away. Then he wouldn't do it now without a reason. Inside the fire zone, visibility dropped to near zero. Heat pressed down like a physical force, warping metal and cracking concrete. The dogs pushed forward anyway, weaving between burning vehicles and collapsing structures, noses low, reading invisible trails left by panic and fear. One dog stopped suddenly, pawing at the ground near a collapsed corridor. Beneath layers of ash and debris, a faint heat signature pulsed, weak, irregular. A trapped airman. The dog barked, long and urgent, then began digging, ignoring falling embers that scorched its fur. Another dog appeared from the smoke, then another. Without hesitation, they shifted positions, some digging, others standing alert, scanning for danger. In the command vehicle, the thermal feed flickered wildly. "Sir, signal interference is increasing," a technician warned. "We're losing clarity." The commander leaned closer, jaw tight. "Keep it alive as long as you can." A distorted radio transmission crackled through the speakers. "Anyone trapped to Hangar 3. The words dissolved into static, but they were enough. "Confirm," the commander said sharply. "Did that come from inside the perimeter?" "Yes, sir," communications replied. "Weak signal, possibly one unit." The commander exhaled slowly. That meant the dogs were right. Fire surged through the hangar, igniting fuel residue along the walls. Inside, 3 airmen huddled low to the ground, oxygen nearly gone. One lay unconscious, helmet melted at the edges. Another pressed a bloodied hand against a crushed leg, teeth clenched to keep from screaming. The third held the radio, whispering into it like a prayer. Then they heard it. Barking. At first they thought it was hallucination, another trick of smoke and heat, but it grew louder, clearer, real. A dog burst through the smoke, eyes bright, body blackened with soot. Another followed, then another. The men stared in disbelief as the dogs moved around them, assessing, nudging, pulling at gear straps. "They came back for us," one airman breathed. Outside, command staff watched the impossible unfold. The dogs guided the conscious airmen toward a service corridor, but debris blocked the exit. Without hesitation, one dog squeezed through a narrow gap, disappearing into flame. Seconds later, it reappeared from another angle, barking insistently. Another route. "Sir," an officer said carefully, "fire is closing fast. Fuel depot temperatures are rising." The commander knew the numbers. He knew the risks. He also knew what he was seeing. 17 dogs had made a decision, no human ordered. They had found their people, and they were not leaving without them. As the thermal feed flickered, and alarms screamed louder across the base, the commander faced a truth that no manual had prepared him for. The evacuation wasn't over. Not while those dogs were still inside. The heat inside the hangar was no longer survivable by any standard measure. Flames clawed along the ceiling, feeding on insulation and fuel residue, sending molten debris raining down in unpredictable bursts. Smoke pressed low to the ground, thick enough to turn every breath into a gamble. The 3 airmen moved only when the dogs forced them to, nudging, pulling, barking sharply whenever hesitation crept in. Staff Sergeant Cole dragged himself forward, his injured leg screaming in protest. Every few seconds, one of the dogs looked back at him, eyes locked, refusing to move until he did. Another dog stayed beside the unconscious airman, gripping the strap of his vest, tugging inch by inch across the scorched floor. A violent crack split the air. A support beam collapsed behind them, cutting off the path they had entered from. Sparks exploded outward, igniting scattered debris. One dog yelped as embers burned into its side but kept moving without slowing. "Corridor's gone," Cole rasped. "We're trapped." The dogs didn't stop. One darted ahead, disappearing into smoke so thick it erased all shape. Seconds passed. Then barking, rapid, urgent, directional, A new path, narrow, dangerous. The dogs regrouped instantly, shifting positions as if they had rehearsed it. In the command vehicle, the thermal feed shook violently. "Signal strength dropping," the technician warned. "We're losing interior mapping." The commander watched as one of the white-hot shapes faltered, then steadied itself, his fists clenched. "They're pushing deeper," an officer said. "Sir, fire intensity is exceeding survivable thresholds." "I know," the commander replied quietly. Inside the hangar, a fuel canister ruptured. Fire surged across the floor in a rolling wave. One dog leapt into it without hesitation, skidding to a stop beside Cole, barking directly into his face. "Move now." Cole pushed through the pain, adrenaline drowning out everything else as he followed. The unconscious airman began to stir, coughing violently as smoke filled his lungs. A dog pressed its body against his chest, forcing him to stay low while another pulled the oxygen mask tighter around his face. They reached a maintenance bay, just as the hangar behind them erupted in flames. The blast threw them forward, concrete shattered, metal screamed. For a moment, everything went dark. When vision returned, the dogs were already moving again. One limped badly now, fur scorched, paw bleeding, but it refused to fall back. It took point, barking once then again, guiding the group through a maze of equipment and half-collapsed walls. Outside, alarms reached a new pitch. "Fuel depot temperature critical," operations reported. "We have minutes, maybe less." The commander said nothing. His eyes never left the screen. Then the feed froze. "Sir, we've lost them," the technician said. "Total blackout." The command vehicle went silent. Handlers stared at the blank screen, fear finally breaking through their discipline. Sergeant Miles lowered his head, whispering his dog's name like a prayer. Inside the inferno, without cameras, without radios, the dogs relied on instinct alone. They reached an exterior service door, blocked by twisted metal. Flames licked around its edges, feeding on leaking fuel. One dog rammed it again and again, shoulder slamming into steel until it finally gave way with a shriek. Fresh air rushed in. The dogs surged forward, pulling the airmen with them, but the moment they crossed into the open, another explosion rocked the base. Fire rolled across the yard, cutting off the evacuation route they had aimed for. The dogs stopped. Smoke billowed, heat rose, the safe path was gone. For the first time since they had charged back into the fire, the dogs hesitated, not from fear but calculation. Then one turned sharply, barking, sprinting toward an alternative route, straight toward the fuel depot's outer perimeter. The most dangerous place left on the base. Back at command, emergency lights flickered as the ground trembled. The commander finally spoke, voice heavy with understanding. "They're running out of options." And deep inside the burning compound, the dogs made one final decision. Risk everything or leave their people behind. They chose the fire. The evacuation helicopters hovered on the perimeter, engines whining against the roar of the wildfire. Dust, ash, and embers swirled in the heat-shimmered air. Every second counted. Every second brought the fuel depots closer to critical temperature. Protocol dictated one thing: no return, no exceptions. Every evacuation manual emphasized this rule. Failure to obey it meant court-martial. Deaths were unavoidable if ignored. Yet the Air Force commander could not look away. Thermal feeds flickered, showing 17 shapes weaving through the smoke. Dogs, alive, determined, leading trapped airmen who might not survive another minute. He rubbed his eyes. Every instinct told him to follow regulations, to protect lives by keeping his personnel safe outside the fire zone. But another instinct, one forged in years of combat and crisis, told him something else. These dogs weren't acting randomly. They were tracking, guiding, rescuing. They had a mission. "Sir," a junior officer said cautiously, "we can't risk the dogs or the airmen going back in. Fuel temperatures are exceeding safe limits. We have to continue evacuation." The commander shook his head, his hands clenched on the console. "If they don't make it, neither will the trapped airmen. We stop everything, hold all departures." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the command vehicle. Officers exchanged tense glances. To defy protocol at a moment like this was nearly unthinkable, yet the commander's voice remained steady. There was no hesitation, no doubt. "Authorize a limited re-entry window," he ordered. Only the dogs and the airmen, and no one else moves in until we're certain the path is clear. Sir, an operations officer started. No questions, the commander said firmly. The dogs know what they're doing. Outside, smoke thickened to near impenetrable density. The remaining airmen on the ground and in helicopters hesitated, unsure if the dogs could actually navigate the maze of fire and debris. Every minute, the fire advanced. The fuel depot was now glowing like a molten heart, threatening to explode at any moment. Inside the command vehicle, the commander watched as one dog veered sharply through a gap between burning walls. It barked, and the airmen followed instinctively, moving low across hot metal and shattered concrete. Another dog dashed ahead, pawing at a collapsed doorway, trying to create a new path. Sparks fell around it like rain. "This is insane," muttered an intelligence officer. "They're moving toward detonation zones." "They're moving toward survival," the commander replied quietly. He could see it on the screens, the dogs coordinating almost like a single mind, splitting into teams, circling obstacles, guiding the airmen safely through smoke and flame. For a moment, the commander remembered every mission he had led, every risk he had calculated, every life he had fought to save. Nothing compared to this. He realized that no regulation could cover a situation where instinct, loyalty, and courage outstripped the rules of man. Minutes passed like hours. On the thermal feed, a dog faltered, paw scorched, body shaking from heat exposure. Another nudged it forward. The injured airman was carried and guided, every movement choreographed instinctively by canine determination. Finally, one of the trapped airmen began to stumble. The dog barked sharply, pressed against him, and refused to move until he followed. The commander exhaled slowly, tension coiling out of his shoulders, but he knew the danger wasn't over. The fire continued to roar, and the fuel depot remained volatile. Yet as the dogs pushed forward, an unspoken truth settled in the command vehicle. Orders could be broken. Protocol could be bent. Courage, loyalty, and instinct could rewrite the rules when lives hung in the balance. And for the first time that day, the commander allowed himself a thought he never admitted aloud. Perhaps the dogs were the only ones who could save them. Outside, the fire surged, the ground shook with small explosions. Smoke obscured the horizon, the dogs disappeared into the inferno, the trapped airmen followed. And the commander, beyond the rules, beyond fear, held his breath, praying instinct would triumph over destruction. The dogs moved like a single organism. Every bark, every pivot, every pawfall was calculated. One dog pressed against the injured airman, nudging him forward over scorched concrete. Another leapt onto a small ledge, clearing rubble and signaling the path ahead. The heat was unbearable. Smoke burned lungs and eyes. Flames licked the edges of their path, scorching fur and clothing, but the dogs refused to retreat. Inside the hangar, debris tumbled from above. A ceiling beam collapsed, sending molten sparks raining down. One dog barked sharply, turning to shield the unconscious airman with its body. It yelped as the heat seared its back but didn't flinch. Another dog grabbed a dangling strap from a harness, dragging the injured airman inches closer to safety. Sergeant Miles watched the feed, jaw tight, hands trembling. He had trained these dogs for explosive detection, for search and rescue, for battlefield scenarios, but never for a fire of this magnitude. Yet what he was witnessing wasn't just obedience. It was instinct. It was loyalty. It was courage on a level that no manual could teach. "Sir," an officer whispered, "they are coordinating. They're splitting into teams, covering each exit and hazard. This isn't training, it's instinct, pure instinct." The commander didn't respond, eyes glued to the feed. One dog paused at a pile of debris, assessing. Another joined, and together they nudged, pulled, and clawed, moving the rubble just enough to create a small passage. The trapped airmen followed, guided by barking, nudges, and unwavering determination. Then an explosion rocked the hangar. Metal twisted, sparks shot through smoke, and flames surged like a tidal wave. One dog faltered, yelping as embers burned its fur. Another pressed against it, barking sharply. The fallen dog didn't move again without assistance. Its partner pulled at it, almost dragging it forward, refusing to abandon the injured comrade. The unconscious airman convulsed, coughing violently as smoke filled his lungs. A dog pressed its body against him, keeping him low while nudging the injured airman toward an exit. Another ran ahead, backtracking to check each corner, ensuring that no one was left behind. Outside, command held their collective breath. Every heartbeat in the room echoed against the roaring fire. "We may lose them," whispered a technician. "We may not get anyone out alive." "No," the commander said firmly. "They'll get out, watch." The dogs didn't hesitate. Heat, smoke, falling debris, and flames were irrelevant. Their focus was absolute: protect the airmen, guide them, survive if possible, but never leave anyone behind. One dog ran into a collapsing corridor to drag a downed beam off an airman's leg. Sparks ignited its fur, but it didn't pause. Another barked, urging a staggered airman forward, snapping him out of shock and fear. Every maneuver was precise. Every act was coordinated without human commands. They communicated with barks, signals, and gestures only they could understand. Training had given them the skills. Instinct gave them purpose. Loyalty gave them courage. The first real casualty appeared. One dog's paw was burned, charred black at the edges. It limped but refused to stop, refusing to retreat. Another dog leaned against it, nudging it onward. Together, they navigated toward the next exit, determined to see the mission through. In the command vehicle, the room was silent except for the feed and the roar of helicopters above. No one spoke, because speaking seemed pointless. They were watching history unfold, loyalty, courage, and instinct displayed in the purest, rawest form. And inside the inferno, as flames curled higher and debris tumbled faster, the dogs pushed forward, one step at a time, moving beyond training, moving beyond expectation, moving toward survival, and the impossible rescue that everyone else believed couldn't be done. Flames roared around them like a living beast. Smoke clawed at lungs and eyes, reducing visibility to mere feet. Every step carried the threat of collapse, embers burning fur and clothing alike. But the dogs pressed on. The airmen, guided and shielded by their canine rescuers, followed in awe and terror. One misstep could end everything. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into minutes, the first dog emerged into open ground, collapsing slightly from heat exhaustion but still moving. Behind it, two airmen staggered, coughing and covered in ash. Another dog followed, dragging the third airman, who had been unconscious only moments ago. "Get medical," a medic shouted, rushing forward. The scene was chaotic, embers falling, equipment ablaze, helicopters hovering just above, dust and smoke whipping through the air. 17 dogs had navigated the inferno with precision, but their bodies bore the proof of the ordeal. Burned paws, singed fur, limping steps. They were heroes written in pain. 16 dogs had made it out. Every handler rushed forward, tears mixing with soot on their cheeks, checking vital signs, praising, hugging, and comforting the exhausted animals. But one dog was missing. A hush fell over the perimeter as the last thermal feed flickered, showing 17 shapes at the fire line, except one. Sergeant Miles' hands trembled as he whispered his dog's name into the smoky chaos. "Rex." Inside the command vehicle, officers exchanged worried glances. "Sir, we may have lost one officer said quietly. "We can't locate it on the feed." The commander didn't respond immediately. He stared at the screens, watching the chaos, trying to read the situation. He had trusted the dog's instincts this far, and he wasn't about to doubt them now. Meanwhile, inside the fire, the missing dog had doubled back. Thick smoke and rising flames had cut off its direct route, but it was still moving toward the last trapped airman. The dog's paws were scorched, its breathing heavy, but it refused to stop. It barked through the roar of the fire, signaling the lost airman to follow. The trapped airman, weak and disoriented, heard the bark faintly at first, then more clearly. He moved toward the sound, crawling over debris, guided by instinct and loyalty that mirrored the dog's own. Every second was a battle. Heat blistered skin, debris tore at clothes, and the fire threatened to engulf them both. Back at the fire line, the commander's voice was calm but sharp. "We hold position," he said. "No one leaves until everyone is accounted for. They won't abandon him, and neither will we." As minutes stretched, the dog emerged from the smoke, dragging the airmen toward the safety of the perimeter. Relief washed over the medics and handlers, who immediately took over, assessing injuries and giving oxygen. The dog collapsed beside its rescued human, chest heaving, paw burned, fur blackened with ash, yet still alert enough to scan the perimeter for threats. The airmen, once terrified and trapped, now clung to life, supported by the creatures who had risked everything. The commander allowed himself the first breath of relief in hours, knowing that each life saved was the direct result of courage, instinct, and loyalty beyond anything training could provide. The missing dog had returned, completing the improbable mission. It had defied fire, heat, and danger, refusing to abandon any of the humans in its care. The full scale of what had just happened began to sink in. 17 dogs, each risking life and limb, navigating a living inferno to save airmen who might otherwise have been lost. And as smoke swirled around them, helicopters roared above, and medics tended to both humans and dogs alike, the base began to feel something it hadn't in hours: hope. 17 dogs had charged back into the fire. 17 dogs had refused to leave their own behind. And somehow they had won. The air around the base smelled of smoke, burning wood, and scorched metal. Helicopters hovered, engines straining, kicking up ash and embers. Medics and handlers moved frantically, tending to burned paws, singed fur, and exhausted bodies. 16 dogs lay panting, eyes alert despite pain. But the 17th dog, the one that had gone missing, was nowhere in sight. A hush fell over the command perimeter as the last signals from inside the hangar faded. Thermal cameras flickered, capturing only the rolling flames. Sergeant Miles pressed his hand to his mouth, whispering his dog's name. "Rex, come back." Inside the inferno, Rex was dragging a weakened airman toward safety. The heat was overwhelming, the smoke nearly choking, and debris threatened to collapse around them. Every step was agony. His paws were burned, fur singed, lungs burning from smoke inhalation, but he refused to stop. One bark, one nudge, one steadfast refusal to abandon the man who had been trapped. The airman, barely conscious, followed Rex instinctively, coughing, stumbling, trusting the dog implicitly. Around them, the inferno roared like a beast determined to consume everything in its path. Sparks rained down, and the smell of molten metal filled the air. Yet the dog moved forward, a small beacon of courage in the chaos. Back at the perimeter, the commander's jaw tightened. "They're not out yet," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the screens. His voice carried the weight of authority, fear, and hope all at once. "They're not out until everyone is accounted for." Minutes stretched like hours. Then a bark, first faint, then clear, echoed across the scorched yard. Thermal feeds picked up a moving shape, weaving through smoke and flame. Rex had returned, leading the last trapped airman toward safety. Handlers ran forward, shouting, tears streaming down their faces. Medics braced as the pair emerged. The airman collapsed into waiting arms, coughing violently, as the dog sank to its belly, exhausted beyond measure, burns covering its paws and body. Yet its eyes remained alert, scanning for danger, refusing to rest until the airman was completely safe. The commander exhaled, finally allowing relief to wash over him. The impossible had been accomplished. 17 dogs had charged into a fire that could have killed them in seconds, guided 17 airmen, or at least the last survivors, through a burning maze of debris and collapsing structures, and emerged victorious. But the cost was evident. Burns, exhaustion, and injuries covered every dog. Their handlers worked tirelessly, tending to wounds, applying cooling sprays, and lifting them to shaded areas. Each dog's chest heaved, each pant heavy with exertion and heat. Yet every tail wagged faintly, every eye held that unwavering loyalty that had guided them through hell itself. The final airman was stabilized, breathing shallow but steady. Handlers and medics exchanged glances, horrified, exhilarated, and filled with awe. None spoke because words would fall short. The commander finally removed his helmet, brushing soot from his forehead, staring at the exhausted, burned, but alive dogs. "We'll make sure they get the recognition they deserve," he said quietly. "All of them." As the last helicopters lifted, the fire behind them continuing to roar across the base, the dogs gathered together. Some leaned on each other, seeking comfort. Others scanned the perimeter, refusing to fully relax. They had done what no human could. They had chosen courage over fear, action over retreat, loyalty over self-preservation. And deep inside the hearts of every observer, airmen, medics, handlers, and commanders alike, one truth rang clear. These dogs had redefined heroism. 17 dogs, 17 airmen, one impossible fire, and the courage to refuse leaving anyone behind. For the first time that day, the base was quiet, not safe, not yet, but alive. And all who witnessed it knew they had seen something extraordinary: loyalty that could not be commanded, courage that could not be taught, and a bond that would never be broken. Weeks passed, and the base had slowly recovered from the inferno. Ash still coated the concrete, scorch marks lined the hangars, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air like a stubborn memory. But life had returned, and so had the people and the dogs. 17 military dogs, burned, exhausted, and limping from their injuries, stood in formation before the Air Force commander. Their handlers flanked them, proud and protective. Cameras and senior officers were present for a ceremony that was rare, unprecedented, and long overdue. The commander cleared his throat, standing at the podium. His uniform was still marked with soot and ash, his face drawn from sleepless nights and endless tension. But his voice was steady, carrying across the formation. "These 17 dogs," he began, "charged back into a fire no human could survive. They defied every regulation, every expectation, and every limit to save their comrades. They did not retreat, because they never leave their own behind." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Airmen, medics, and officers alike wiped tears. These were not just dogs, they were heroes. They had done what no training could have fully prepared anyone for, guided only by instinct, loyalty, and courage. Sergeant Miles knelt beside his dog, Rex, running a hand over his singed fur. "You did it, buddy. You saved lives." The dog leaned against him, chest heaving, paw burned but still steady, eyes bright with the understanding that they had completed their mission. One by one, the handlers spoke quietly to their dogs, praising them, thanking them, and comforting them for the pain they had endured. Each canine responded with small gestures, a nuzzle, a paw, a wag of the tail, simple acts that carried the weight of unspeakable heroism. The ceremony continued with official commendations. Medals were awarded to the handlers, yes, but the true heroes were furred, four-legged, and exhausted. The Air Force announced that each dog would receive formal recognition in military records, a rare honor that acknowledged bravery under fire. A small plaque was unveiled near the rebuilt hangar. It read, "They did not retreat because they never leave their own behind." Soldiers and civilians alike gathered around, some snapping photos, others standing silently, hearts heavy and inspired. The story of these dogs would travel far beyond the base, becoming legend in both military and civilian circles. But for the handlers, the story wasn't about fame. It was about bond, about trust, about knowing that in moments when human courage wavered, their dogs would act with an instinct that no training manual could replicate. The commander watched them, reflecting on every decision he had made that day. The evacuation order, the risk of re-entry, the faith he placed in creatures he had trained but never fully understood until that moment. He realized that bravery wasn't measured in rank, nor in strategy. It was measured in loyalty, sacrifice, and the courage to face death to protect others. As the sun set over the desert, casting orange and gold across the scorched landscape, the dogs lay together in the shade, recovering from their ordeal. Some slept, some watched, but all had the quiet, unwavering dignity of those who had faced impossible odds and prevailed. The airmen who had been saved stood nearby, touching the dogs gently, murmuring thanks. Lives had been preserved, bonds had been sealed, and a legend had been born. And in the hearts of all who witnessed it, commanders, medics, airmen, and handlers alike, the lesson was unforgettable. True courage does not retreat. True loyalty does not falter. And sometimes, heroism walks on four legs, runs through fire, and refuses to leave anyone behind. The wildfire had claimed buildings, scorched earth, and chaos. But it could not destroy the bond between humans and their dogs. It could not erase courage, loyalty, or sacrifice. It could not erase the story of 17 military dogs who became legends. And as the night fell, the wind carried away the last smoke, leaving behind the unmistakable truth. Some heroes do not wear uniforms, have fur, paws, and hearts larger than any human imagination.